At my 65th birthday party, my daughter raised her wine glass as the projector screen lit up behind her. If you have any self-respect left, Dad, sell this house and pay for your own care. Over 40 relatives fell silent as a spreadsheet showing more than $3 million in future expenses appeared on the wall. She called me the greatest burden of her life. I didn't argue. I simply pulled my old leather briefcase closer, because inside it was the one thing that would make everyone see my daughter differently before the night ended. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever discovered something about your family that completely changed how you saw everything? Just yes or no in the comments. Your perspective matters. Here. Quick note, some details in this story are fictionalized for depth and reflection, but the message at its core is what truly matters. I'm 65 years old, and my daughter just put my funeral expenses on a projector screen in front of 40 people who brought casseroles. Let me back up. My name is Raymond Kowalski. I spent 29 years keeping the furnaces running at Homestead Works before they shut the doors in 2009. Tonight, October 20th, 2023. I'm sitting at the head of my own dining table in the brick house I bought in 1983, and the room smells like Dorothy Brennan's deviled eggs and someone's burnt garlic bread. Dorothy is my next-door neighbor, 72 years old, been living next door for 25 years. She was setting out those eggs on my kitchen counter when I walked in an hour ago, and she smiled at me the way you smile at someone whose birthday cake is waiting in the other room. 40 people showed up. My son Edward drove me here after my car wouldn't start. Edward's 42, works as an electrician, and he's got his mother's dark hair, but my wide hands. He clapped me on the shoulder when we walked through the door, said, "Happy birthday, old man," and I told him I wasn't old until I stopped fixing my own plumbing. My daughter Diane is 38. She works as a marketing director downtown, and she showed up tonight with a laptop and a projector I didn't ask for. She's wearing a charcoal blazer, hair pulled back tight, and she's been fussing with cables near my television for the last 10 minutes while people ate potato salad. Her husband, Gregory, my son-in-law, 41 years old, sells high-end commercial real estate, stood beside her checking the projector brightness. He's got the kind of smile you see in ads for luxury cars. He nodded at Diane when the screen lit up white, and she nodded back. My granddaughter Lily ran up and hugged my waist before I could sit down. She's 9 years old, Diane and Gregory's daughter, and her fingers were stained blue from crayons. "Happy birthday, Grandpa," she said, and I ruffled her hair and told her to go get some cake before her cousins ate it all. I sat down. The chair creaked. My leather briefcase rested beneath my feet, the one Diane gave me back in 2010, so I'd look more professional when I went to the bank. I keep my hand on it sometimes without thinking. My younger sister, Beatrice, sat across from me, 61 years old, arranging napkins in perfect triangles, the way she's done at every family gathering since 1976. My cousin Franklin, 70, a retired welder from the same mill, sat 2 seats down holding a glass of iced tea. Walter Hoffman, 68, my attorney for 30 years since we worked third shift together, sat in the corner with a thick yellow manila envelope on his lap. Harold Bennett, 66, retired from the credit union last year, was cutting himself a second slice of ham. Diane tapped a spoon against her glass. The room went quiet. "Before Dad blows out the candles," she said, smiling, "I have a special gift." She aimed a little black remote at the projector. "Let me tell you what 42 years in a steel mill teaches you how to read a room, the way you read a furnace, by the color of the silence." Right then, the silence went from warm yellow to cold gray. The screen flashed to life, bold white text on black. The projected cost of caring for a retired failure over the next 20 years. I blinked. Below the title, a spreadsheet. Line items, neat columns, numbers with commas. Nursing home care estimated $2,040,000. Medications and medical equipment, $385,000. In-home caregivers partial $427,000. Diane's lost opportunity cost time $340,000. Miscellaneous legal arrangements $55,000. Total $3,247,000. At the bottom, in red text twice the size of the rest, "If you have any self-respect left, Dad, sell the house and pay for yourself." The room didn't gasp, it didn't murmur, it went absolutely still the way air goes, still right before a furnace door blows. I read that red line twice. "If you have any self-respect left," she used the word self-respect. To the man who worked 847 night shifts just to pay her college tuition. I know the exact number because I kept a notebook. I still have it. Lily stopped eating her cake. She looked at her mother, then at me, then back at her cake. She set her fork down without a sound. Edward half stood his chair, scraping tile. Diane, what the hell? Diane held up one hand, eyes still on me. Dad knows what I'm talking about, don't you, Dad? Gregory folded his arms, leaning against the doorway, like a man watching a car he just sold drive off the lot. Beatrice's hands started shaking. She gripped her napkin and didn't look up. Franklin slammed his glass down harder than he meant to. The ice rattled. I didn't say anything. I looked at the screen, at the red text, at my daughter's face. She thought I was stunned. She thought I was hurt. She gave a little half smirk, the kind you give someone when you finally said the thing you've been holding in for years. She looked at me and waited. My hand never left the briefcase. I felt the worn leather under my palm, the brass latches cool against my thumb. I've carried this case to every bank appointment, every meeting with Walter, every consultation about the house since 2010. Diane thought she was teaching me to look professional. She never asked what I kept inside. I read that final line one more time. If you have any self-respect left. My daughter looked at me and gave that half smirk. She thought I was reaching for a handkerchief to wipe my eyes. She's never seen me prepare for a job. 40 people holding their breath is the loudest sound in my living room. I bent down. My knees cracked 65-year-old knees that spent 4 decades on concrete floors. My right hand found the briefcase handle. The leather was warm from resting against my ankle. Diane watched me reach down. Her shoulders relaxed. She thought she'd won. Edward stood up fast enough that his chair scraped tile. Diane, what the hell is this? Sit down, Eddie. Diane didn't even look at him. Her eyes stayed on me. This is between me and Dad. You just put a $3 million invoice on a screen in front of his friends. I don't have to justify myself to any of you. Diane's voice went sharp. I'm the one who raised both my kids while he worked nights and barely showed up for anything. I earned the right to speak my mind. Beatrice's hands were shaking so hard she dropped her napkin. Franklin set his glass down and stared at Diane like he was seeing her for the first time. I lifted the briefcase onto my lap. The room went quieter. I didn't know that was possible. Diane folded her arms. Gregory leaned against the doorframe, watching me, the way a real estate agent watches someone read a contract they think is airtight. I clicked open the first brass latch, then the second. Diane's half smirk came back. She thought I was pulling out tissues. Maybe an old birthday card she'd written me in 1994. Something sentimental to guilt her into taking back what she'd said. She doesn't know me as well as she thinks. I opened the case. Inside were 3 folders, heavy ones, the kind with metal reinforcement along the spine. One had a blue binder clip, one had red, one had black. I pulled them out and set them on the table in front of me. Precise, the way I used to set tools on a workbench before a job. Everything in order, everything within reach. Diane's smirk flickered. I didn't say a word. I just looked at the folders. 42 years fixing heavy machinery taught me this: when a part starts to fail, you don't yell at it, you document exactly when, where, and how it broke. I've been documenting for a long time. You can pull out whatever you want, Dad. Diane's voice had an edge now. No piece of paper changes the facts. I didn't answer. I flipped open the blue folder. The first page had a header I'd typed. Myself, financial support provided to Diane Marie Carroll, née Kowalski, 1985 to 2023. Below that rose, dates in the left column, amounts in the middle, purposes on the right. Every single row had her name. Diane saw it. I watched her eyes track across the page and the smirk died completely. Gregory pushed off the doorframe. His jaw tightened. He's a man who sells buildings for a living. He knows what documentation looks like when it's about to become a problem. I still didn't say anything. Edward leaned forward, trying to see the page. Dad, what is that? I turned the folder so it faced the room. The first line read, August 15th, 1985. Diane's first day of kindergarten. School supplies and backpack, $47. Below that, September 3rd, 1985. New shoes school required, $23. Below that, October 12th, 1985. Winter coat, $65. The list went on, page after page. Every item had a date. Every date had an amount. Every amount had a receipt paperclipped to the back. Beatrice put her hand over her mouth. Franklin whispered, Jesus Christ, Ray. I flipped to the next page. 1986, dance lessons, doctor visits, a bike for her 8th birthday, the basket she wanted that cost an extra $12. Another page, 1991, braces, retainer, second retainer after she lost the first one, another, 1995. Driver's ed. Car insurance when she got her license. Repairs after she backed into a mailbox. I flipped faster now. 1999. University of Pittsburgh tuition first semester. Dorm fees, meal plan, books. 2000 second semester. New laptop because hers crashed during finals week. 2001. Study abroad in London. 2002. Graduation gift. Security deposit for her first apartment. I kept flipping. The pages made a sound like a deck of cards being shuffled. 2005. Wedding costs. My half, which became 3/4 when Gregory's parents backed out. 2007. Down payment loan for the house in Squirrel Hill, never paid back. 2010. Lily's private preschool tuition for 6 months when Diane was between jobs. The room was so quiet, I could hear Dorothy breathing 2 chairs over. I reached the last page of the blue folder. 2023, a check I wrote in March to cover Diane's car payment when she called me crying about cash flow. At the bottom of the final page, I'd written in pen, total documented financial support, 1985 to 2023, $398,255. I let that sit. Diane's face had gone pale. Not white, just pale the way metal looks right before it's hot enough to bend. Dad, she started. I held up one finger. Not rude, just wait. I closed the blue folder, set my hand on the red one. Gregory's eyes followed my hand. She bought me this briefcase in 2010, said I needed to look more professional for retirement meetings. I've been carrying her receipts in it for 15 years. Every bank visit, every meeting with Walter about setting up the trust, every time I refinanced the house to cover something she needed. I opened the red folder. The first page had a different header. Promises made by Diane Marie Carroll, née Kowalski, regarding repayment. Status unfulfilled. Below that, more rows. Dates. Amounts she said she'd pay back. Timelines she gave me. Every promise documented in her own handwriting I'd kept. The notes she wrote, the texts. She sent photocopies of everything. Diane stood up. Stop. I didn't stop. I set my finger on the first line. March 2007. I'll pay you back when Gregory's commission comes through. I promised Dad. Commission came through. No payment. June 2010. Just 6 months, I swear, then I'll start paying you back in installments. No installments. November 2015. I know I've said it before, but this time I mean it. I'll get you the money by Christmas. Christmas came. No money. I set my hand on the black folder. 3 folders, 30 years. I flipped to the first page of the blue file and laid it flat on the wood for everyone to see. That was the moment my daughter realized tonight wasn't going according to her plan. It was going according to mine. I read the first line the way I used to read timesheets at shift change. No emotion, just the numbers. Tuition. University of Pittsburgh Fall. 1999 to spring 2003. I tapped the page. $68,400. I turned the page. Behind it, photocopied tuition bills. 4 years' worth. Every semester clipped together. Diane's face had gone from pale to gray. Books and supplies, same period. I kept my voice flat. $4,200. Another page. Dorm fees, meal plan, student health insurance, $11,600. Franklin leaned forward, staring at the folders, like he'd just discovered I'd been building a car in my basement for 30 years and never mentioned it. I flipped ahead. Graduation gift, May 2003. Check made out to Diane Marie Kowalski, $5,000. Edward was reading over my shoulder now. I heard him breathe in sharp. First apartment security deposit, August 2003. Oakland, 1800. Dad, Diane started. I held up one finger again. Still not rude. Just wait. Down payment, Shadyside apartment, March 2006. I looked up at her. $22,000. You said it was a loan. You said you'd pay me back when Gregory's commission came through. Gregory shifted his weight. His arms were still folded, but his jaw had gone tight. I turned another page. Credit card consolidation payoff, October 2009. Visa and MasterCard combined, $31,700. Beatrice made a sound like someone had stepped on her foot. You told me, I said, still reading, that you were drowning. You used that word, drowning. You said if I didn't help, you'd lose the house. I looked at Diane. She looked at the wall. BMW 328i partial payment, April 2012. I tapped the line. $18,000. You needed a reliable car for work. You picked the color, crimson red. Franklin slammed his hand on the table. Not at me, just at the air. Jesus Christ, Ray. I kept reading. Lily's preschool tuition, September 2014 through February 2015. 6 months. You were between marketing jobs, 4,200. Christmas gifts I bought for Lily and mailed to your address because you said money was tight. 2015 through 2022. Average 600 per year. Total 4,800. Home repair loan June 2018. Roof and gutters. You said the contractor needed payment up front, 9,200. I flipped to the last page of the blue folder. Car payment March 2023. I looked up. 3 months ago. You called me crying. You said cash flow was bad, and you needed 1,500 to cover the BMW payment, or they'd repossess it. Diane was staring at her hands. I set my finger on the bottom line. Total documented financial support blue folder, 1999 through 2023, $247,000. The room didn't breathe, and this is just the first folder. I closed the blue file, set it aside, left the red and black ones untouched. In the steel mill, we kept every maintenance log for 40 years, because when a furnace fails, the lawyers want proof of what you did and when you did it. I learned that in 1980. I've been applying it ever since. Diane finally looked up. Her voice came out quiet. You kept receipts for 40 years. Photocopies, I said. Originals are in a safety deposit box at PNC. Gregory's expression changed. That's when he understood this wasn't sentiment. This was preparation. Edward was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Dad, why didn't you ever say anything? Because she's my daughter. I looked at him. You don't keep score with your kids. You just help them. I let that sit for 3 seconds, until they put a $3 million invoice on a projector screen and call you a failure in front of 40 people who brought casseroles. Diane flinched. I pushed the blue folder to the center of the table so everyone could see it. Now, I said, let me tell you how I knew this was coming tonight. I looked at Lily. She was sitting very still, holding a paper napkin she'd folded into a tiny square. My voice softened, first time all evening. 2 weeks ago, I said my granddaughter came to visit me. I made her chocolate chip cookies. We sat at my kitchen table and she told me something. Lily looked at me. Her eyes were wide. She said, Grandpa, Mommy, and Daddy said you need to sell your house so we can have money. Are you sad? The room went still again. Different kind of still. The kind that happens when a child accidentally tells the truth adults were trying to hide. Diane closed her eyes. Gregory stared at Lily with an expression I couldn't read. Not anger, something else. Calculation, maybe. Measuring how much damage a 9-year-old had just done. She's 9 years old, I said. She didn't know it was a secret. She was just worried about her grandpa. I looked at Diane. Because of her, I had 2 weeks to get ready for tonight. Edward's mouth opened, closed, opened again. You knew. I knew she was planning something. I gestured at the projector still glowing white against my living room wall. I didn't know it would be this. I set my hand on the red folder. Didn't open it. Just rested my palm on top. A 9-year-old child eating chocolate chip cookies told me more truth in 5 minutes than my daughter had given me in 5 years. I looked around the room, at Dorothy still holding her plate, at Franklin gripping his glass, at Beatrice whose hands had finally stopped shaking, at Walter in the corner with his yellow envelope, at Harold, who'd gone very quiet. The only source of honesty in this entire family, I said looking straight at Diane, is a 9-year-old child. Diane said nothing, but I saw her hands clenching under the table, white knuckles, pressed hard into her thighs. She wasn't angry because she was caught. She was angry because she was exposed by her own child, and I still had 2 more folders sitting on that table. Walter Hoffman stood up from his chair in the corner of the room for the first time tonight, and every eye in the house tracked him. He's 68 years old. We worked third shift together at the mill from 1979 to 2003. He went to law school part-time, passed the bar in 91, kept working furnace maintenance until his practice could pay the bills. He's the kind of man who doesn't stand up unless he's got something to say that matters. He pulled a thick yellow manila envelope from inside his coat pocket. Good evening. His voice had that lawyer tone, calm, clear, no wasted words. My name is Walter Hoffman. I'm an attorney licensed to practice in Pennsylvania, and I've represented Raymond Kowalski for 30 years. He opened the envelope, pulled out a document, set it on the table next to my 3 folders. I am also, he said, the successor trustee of Raymond's Revocable Living Trust, established in March of 2010. Diane's head snapped toward him. Walter kept talking. The homestead property at this address was moved into said trust on March 18th, 2010, and remains titled under that structure. Under Pennsylvania law and the terms of the trust document, no person, including any named beneficiary, has the right to sell, mortgage, or otherwise transfer this asset without the physical signature of the current trustee. He tapped the document with one finger. That trustee is Raymond Kowalski. Gregory stood up fast. His chair didn't scrape. It thumped. You can't do... I can. Walter didn't raise his voice. He just pointed at me. And here is the notarized copy filed with the Allegheny County Recorder of Deeds on March 22, 2010. Public record. You could have looked it up any time in the last 13 years. Gregory went very still. That's when I knew. He had looked it up. He knew about the trust. He was hoping I didn't know he knew. Walter set the document down and folded his hands. This property cannot be sold to satisfy any debt claim or demand without Mr. Kowalski's signature, period. Diane's mouth opened, closed. She looked at me, then at Walter, then at Gregory. You knew, she said to Gregory. Quiet. Not a question. Gregory didn't answer. Here's the difference between a man who plans and a man who schemes. I filed the trust paperwork the same month my daughter told me this house looked poor. I didn't file it because I thought she'd turn on me someday. I filed it because Walter told me it was smart financial planning, and I listened to men who know more than I do. Gregory filed nothing. He just showed up tonight with a projector. Walter sat back down. His job was done. Harold Bennett stood up. Harold's 66, retired from the credit union last year after 43 years as a loan officer. He's the kind of man who reads every line of every contract twice and then reads the footnotes. He pulled his phone from his pocket. I need to say something. The room went quiet again. 4 months ago, Harold said Gregory called me, asked if I knew any commercial developers looking for acquisition opportunities in Homestead. I introduced him to Vincent Holloway. Gregory's jaw tightened. Last week, Harold continued, Holloway's assistant sent out contract updates for a deal they're working on. She accidentally left me on the CC line. He held up his phone. The email contained a commission agreement between Gregory Carroll and Vincent Holloway, $45,000. Diane's head turned toward her husband. Harold kept reading. Conditioned upon successful acquisition of the property located at... He gave my address. Before December 31st, 2023. He looked up, looked straight at Diane. Your name was left off the agreement entirely, Diane. The room didn't gasp. It just absorbed the information like a sponge soaking up water. Diane stared at Gregory. What? Gregory said nothing. Harold wasn't done. Under Pennsylvania's Real Estate Licensing and Registration Act, RELRA, and the Fiduciary Duty Standards, enforced by the Pennsylvania Real Estate Commission, an undisclosed commission agreement like this one constitutes a direct breach of fiduciary duty to his client. It's grounds for immediate license revocation and potential civil liability. Edward leaned back in his chair. Holy hell. I watched my daughter's face. She wasn't angry yet. She was trying to understand. Gregory, her voice was steady. What is he talking about? Gregory finally looked at her. It's not what it sounds like. It sounds, Diane said slowly, like you made a deal to sell my father's house and didn't tell me you were getting paid for it. I was going to tell you when... Her voice went sharp. After you cashed the check, Gregory's hands came up, defensive. You're the one who said we needed the money. I was trying to help. By cutting me out of the deal. By handling it. His voice rose for the first time all night. You wanted me to fix this. I'm fixing it. Fixing it? Diane's laugh came out bitter. You're stealing from my father and calling it help. I'm not stealing $45,000, Gregory. How much of that were you planning to tell me about? He didn't answer. My daughter stared at her husband the way you look at a gauge when the pressure reads higher than the spec sheet says is possible. Not panic, just the slow realization that something is very wrong and has been wrong for longer than you thought. Franklin muttered something under his breath I couldn't hear. Beatrice was staring at Diane with an expression I recognized. Pity, the kind you feel when you watch someone realize their marriage isn't what they thought it was. Walter pulled another paper from his envelope. There's more. Diane turned to him. Her face had gone from pale to white. Harold and I have been coordinating, Walter said. There are some financial details you should know about. Harold nodded, pulled up something else on his phone. I didn't move, just watched. My daughter looked at her husband. For the first time all night, it wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of total confusion. I've spent 42 years fixing heavy machinery. I know what a part looks like right before it snaps. Harold Bennett remained standing. He wasn't finished and pulled up a credit report on his phone that made the room go colder. From the banking side, he said, reading from his screen, I see $380,000 in total debt. Maxed credit cards across 4 different issuers, 2 personal loans in collections, and a margin trading account that has been completely liquidated. Diane's shoulders went rigid. Harold kept reading. The margin call happened in July. Liquidation covered the broker's exposure but left her liable for the loss. Walter stood back up. They'd coordinated this. I could tell by the way they moved. Harold steps back. Walter steps forward like shift workers handing off a job. From the trust records side, Walter said, pulling a different document from his envelope, when Diane tried to use her expected inheritance as collateral to secure an emergency private loan, our office flagged the inquiry. That's standard procedure when someone tries to borrow against assets they don't yet own. He set the document on the table. That specific private loan, $120,000 at 18% annual interest. Gregory closed his eyes. Edward whispered, Jesus. Harold and Walter looked at each other. Then they both looked at the room. Total, Harold said. $500,000? Walter finished. Harold nodded. Deadline December 31st of this year. Walter checked his watch. 83 days left. The room fell into a different kind of quiet. Not shock. Math. 40 people doing division in their heads, calculating what $500,000 divided by 83 days looks like. $6,000 per day. Every day. For almost 3 months. Franklin set his glass down very carefully, like he was afraid it might shatter. 83 days. My daughter needed $500,000 in 83 days, and she showed up to my birthday party with a spreadsheet and a projector. Diane's hands were shaking now. Not like Beatrice's hands, those shook from emotion. Diane's shook from something else. Fear, maybe. Or the kind of exhaustion you get when you've been holding up a wall for 6 months and your arms finally give out. She didn't look at me. She looked at the table. Gregory put his hand on her shoulder. She shrugged it off. Walter sat back down. Harold put his phone away. I reached for the red folder. The room watched. I opened it. Inside weren't spreadsheets. They were timesheets. Real ones. Actual paper yellowed at the edges, some of them creased from being folded and carried in my back pocket for years before I filed them away. I pulled out the first sheet, March 1999. These, I said, are the 847 graveyard shifts I picked up over 11 years. I set the timesheet on the table. Night shifts paid an extra $22 differential per hour. 8-hour shifts. I worked 11 at night until 7 in the morning, then came home, took a shower, and clocked into my regular day shift at 8. Beatrice made a small sound. I flipped to the next sheet. April 1999, then May, then June. 11 years, I said, 1999 to 2010. I spread the sheets across the table. Month after month, year after year, the paper made a soft rustling sound like leaves. Edward leaned forward. He picked up one of the sheets, looked at it, set it down, picked up another. Dad, he said quietly, I didn't know. You were a kid, I said. You weren't supposed to know. I kept spreading the sheets. The table was covered now. Timesheets overlapping timesheets. A decade of nights I didn't sleep documented in blue ink and supervisor signatures. Beatrice reached out and pulled one closer. She looked at it for a long time. Then she saw the margin. Every timesheet had a handwritten note. Small, meticulous, my handwriting. The one Beatrice was holding said, Reason tuition fall, 1999. She picked up another. Reason Diane's visa December 2003. Another. Reason apartment deposit March 2006. She set the sheet down, buried her face in her hands, started to cry. Not quiet crying, the kind that shakes your whole body. Franklin put his arm around her shoulders. I kept spreading the timesheets. Every night, I said, I wrote down why I was doing it. Not for the Mills records, they didn't care why I picked up extra shifts, for mine. So I'd remember years later exactly why I was doing it. Diane was staring at the table, at the sea of timesheets covering the wood. I pulled out the last page in the red folder, a summary sheet I'd typed myself. 847 shifts, total graveyard differential earnings $186,340. I set it on top of the pile. That's what I earned extra, on top of my regular pay, by not sleeping. The room was silent. Dorothy had tears running down her face. She wasn't even trying to wipe them away. Edward was holding a timesheet from June 2002. His hands were shaking. The margin note said, Reason Diane's book summer session. He set it down like it was made of glass. I closed the red folder, set it beside the blue one. 2 folders now, neat, aligned. The black folder sat untouched. Diane finally looked up. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red but dry. She hadn't cried yet, just stared. Dad, she started. I held up my hand, not to stop her, just wait. 847 nights, I said, and that was just the cash. I put my hand on the black folder. I haven't even opened the black folder yet. I looked at my daughter. The black folder is the one I wanted to talk about least. I looked toward Dorothy Brennan and gave her a small nod. We had prearranged this moment 2 days ago, the same afternoon Lily told me about the projector. Dorothy set down her plate, stood up. Her hands were steadier now. I need to say something, she said. The room turned toward her. She's 72 years old. Been my neighbor for 25 years. She's the kind of woman who notices everything and says nothing unless it matters. Tonight it mattered. 11 years ago, Dorothy said. In March of 2012, my landline rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. She looked at me, then at Diane. It was Raymond. He told me, Dot, I need to ask a favor. I'm going to wire money into your account. Transfer it to Diane and tell her it's a personal loan from you. Do not mention my name. Diane's head came up fast. Dorothy kept talking. I asked him why. He said it was important, that Diane needed help and couldn't know it came from him. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her cardigan pocket, opened it. Bank transfer records. 3 o'clock that same morning, Diane called me, sobbing hysterically. Said she was about to lose everything, her apartment, her car, her credit score. Dorothy's voice didn't waver. She'd practiced this. I'd asked her to practice because I knew it would be hard. She said she couldn't let Gregory find out. Gregory's head snapped toward Diane. Dorothy set the paper on the table. Raymond sent $87,000. I transferred it to Diane, every penny. Told her it was a personal loan from me like he asked. Diane's face had gone white. But here's what your father didn't tell you, Dorothy said. He had to cash out his retirement fund early to get that money. 10% penalty for early withdrawal plus income tax on the full amount. She looked at me. I nodded. $28,740, Dorothy said. Straight to the IRS, gone. Franklin's jaw dropped. Edward closed his eyes. Dorothy folded the paper back up, put it in her pocket. To make sure his daughter got $87,000 clear, he had to sacrifice $115,000 gross, a 33% loss to the government just to protect her pride. She sat back down. The room didn't breathe. Gregory was staring at Diane. Not the way you stare at someone when you're angry, the way you stare at someone when you're trying to figure out who they are. You went bankrupt, he said. His voice was low but sharp enough for the whole table to hear. And you never told me. Not a question, a statement. Diane didn't look at him. She looked at her hands. We were just dating then, she said quietly. We were engaged. The room went silent. Different kind of silent. The kind that happens when you watch something break that you can't fix. Diane's hands clenched into fists on her lap. Gregory kept staring at her. Engaged, Diane. We were planning a wedding. You were bankrupt, and you didn't tell me. It was handled, she said. Handled, his voice cracked. You took $87,000 from your father, who you just called a failure on a projector screen, and you told me it was a loan from Dorothy. I paid Dorothy back. Did you pay your father back? Silence. Did you... Gregory's voice went harder. Diane shook her head. Barely. Gregory looked around the room, at the 40 people watching, at Franklin, at Beatrice, at the pastor from their church who'd shown up for cake and was now witnessing the dismantling of a marriage. He manually forced his expression back to neutral, straightened his posture, pulled his shoulders back, but his eyes had completely changed. I've spent 42 years fixing heavy machinery. I know what it looks like when a gear decides to break away from the rest of the system. When the metal's been stressed too long and something finally gives. Their marriage altered right there in my kitchen. Not loud, not dramatic, just a shift, a crack. I didn't feel a sense of victory. It felt like watching 2 expensive pieces of equipment being run completely into the dirt. Gregory stood up, pushed his chair back. It didn't scrape this time. He'd learned. He moved carefully, deliberately, like a man who knows 40 people are watching, and he needs to look composed. I need some air, he said. He walked out, didn't slam the door, just opened it, stepped through, closed it behind him with a soft click. Diane sat very still, staring at nothing. Beatrice reached across the table and put her hand over Diane's. Diane pulled away. Edward was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger, something else. Sadness, maybe. Or the kind of respect you give someone when you realize they've been carrying weight you never knew existed. Franklin cleared his throat. Ray, I held up my hand. Not done yet. The black folder was still sitting on the table, untouched. The one I'd been avoiding all night. I put my hand on it. The room watched. Diane looked up, saw the folder. Her face changed. Not fear, recognition, like she'd forgotten it was there and just remembered what was inside. "Dad," she said, "please." I didn't answer. Just rested my palm on the black folder and looked at her. 42 years in a steel mill teaches you when to stop and when to keep going. When a part's been stressed to its limit and needs a break, and when it needs one more turn of the wrench to prove what it's made of. My daughter had put me on a screen and called me the biggest bill of her life. I wasn't done presenting my invoice. The black folder hadn't moved. Neither had Gregory's expression until it did. I reached for the black folder, the third and final file, and the room went quieter than it had been all night. My fingers found the edge. I pulled it toward me. The binder clip was heavier than the others. More pages inside, maybe, or just the weight of what they represented. I clicked it open. Inside was a single photocopied property deed, Allegheny County Records, and below that a closing statement from August 1998. I pulled them out, set them on the table. My grandfather, I said, left me 3 acres of raw land in Bethel Park when he passed in 1997. Franklin nodded. He remembered. He'd been at the funeral. In August of 1998, I continued, I sold that land for $47,000. I tapped the closing statement. The numbers were there. Sale price $47,000. Closing cost $2,300. Net to seller $44,700. It was the only asset I could liquidate fast enough, I said. Banks don't move in 3 weeks. Land buyers do if the price is right. Diane was staring at the paper. I used that money to pay your freshman year tuition at Pitt, I said. Full year, room and board, books, everything. I pulled out the second document, a printout, recent. I'd printed it last week at the library. I looked up the current assessment for that plot last month, I said. That exact plot. Same 3 acres. I turned the printout so the room could see it. Zillow listing, Redfin comparison, county tax assessment, current estimated value $1,800,000. Franklin closed his eyes. Beatrice put her hand over her mouth. They built a massive commercial shopping center over it, I said. Strip mall, Target, Best Buy, Panera Bread, parking lot for 600 cars. I set the printout down next to the deed. $1,800,000. That's what my grandfather's land is worth today. I sold it for $47,000 so she could go to Pitt. She graduated, she made it. She's ashamed of me. The room was silent. Edward was staring at the papers like they were written in a language he didn't know how to read. Diane's face had gone past white. It was gray now, the color of ash. I'm not bringing this up to complain, I said. I looked straight at her. I'm bringing it up because my daughter asked if I had any self-respect left. I tapped the red text on her projector slide, still glowing on my living room wall. If you have any self-respect left, Dad. I had plenty of self-respect, I said. I had 3 acres of land my grandfather worked his whole life to pay off. I had retirement savings. I had night shifts I could have spent sleeping. I had all of it, and I gave it to you. Diane didn't move. Not because you asked, I said. Because you're my daughter. I closed the black folder, but I didn't set it aside. I reached into the bottom of it, pulled out a small white envelope, different from the yellow one Walter had brought. This one was plain, no markings. I looked at Edward. Son, I said, come here. Edward stood up slowly, walked around the table, stood beside my chair. I handed him the envelope. Open it, I said. He looked at me, then at the envelope, then back at me. He opened it. Inside was a deed, property deed, Allegheny County, recorded and notarized. Edward pulled it out, read the address. His hands started shaking. That's a house in Baldwin Borough, I said. Small place, 3-bedroom, quiet street, working-class neighborhood, South Pittsburgh. Edward kept staring at the paper. I bought that house in 2013, I said, and paid off the mortgage over 12 years. Last month it cleared, paid in full. I pointed at the deed. Your name's on it, not mine. Yours has been since the beginning. I just held the mortgage. Edward's lip trembled, just slightly. He didn't cry. Pittsburgh men don't cry at kitchen tables in front of 40 people. But his lip trembled. You never once asked me for a single dime, I said. Not once in 42 years. You drove me here tonight when my car wouldn't start. You check on me every Sunday. You fix my wiring when it sparks. You don't ask, you just do. I tapped the deed. This belongs to you. Edward stared at the paper, looked at me. His mouth opened, closed. He nodded once, just once. That quiet Pittsburgh nod. The kind that means everything a man can't figure out how to say out loud. My son stood there holding that deed. He didn't speak. I didn't need him to. There are things two Pittsburgh men understand without ever clearing their throats. 42 years of showing up, of not asking, of just being there when the furnace breaks or the car won't start, or your father turns 65 and your sister puts him on a screen. Edward folded the deed carefully, put it back in the envelope, held it against his chest. Thank you, he said, quiet, barely above a whisper. I nodded. He went back to his seat, sat down, set the envelope on the table in front of him, stared at it. Diane was watching him, not with anger, not with jealousy, just watching, like she was trying to understand a math problem that didn't make sense. Franklin was smiling. First smile all night. Small one, the kind you give when you see something done right. Beatrice was crying again, but different crying now. The kind that happens when you watch something good happen to someone who deserves it. I looked around the room, at the 40 people who'd come here for cake and stayed for this. At Walter with his yellow envelope, at Harold with his phone, at Dorothy who'd kept my secret for 11 years, at the timesheet still spread across the table, at my daughter sitting very still staring at nothing, at my son holding a house deed he didn't know existed, at the black folder finally empty, almost empty. I reached into the bottom of the black folder. The air in the room was suffocatingly heavy, and the adults had stopped speaking entirely. Only the faint clinking of silverware cut through the quiet. Someone's fork against a plate, a glass being set down too carefully. Then I heard small footsteps. Lily slid off her folding chair. She was holding something, a piece of paper folded into quarters. She walked toward me, slowly, the way kids walk when they're not sure if they're interrupting. She stopped beside my chair. Grandpa, she said, quiet. I made this for your birthday, but I didn't know when to give it. She held out the paper. I took it. Cheap loose-leaf notebook paper, the kind they give kids in 3rd grade. Folded small. I could see crayon marks bleeding through from the other side. I unfolded it. Carefully. The creases were sharp. She'd folded it and unfolded it several times like she'd been practicing. Inside was a drawing. 2 stick figures, one large, one small, sitting on what looked like a riverbank. Green grass, blue water with wavy lines. 2 fishing poles, brown sticks with black string. A bright yellow sun in the corner. The kind kids draw with rays coming out like spokes on a wheel. And across the bottom, in shaky blocky blue crayon letters, written by a 9-year-old hand, my favorite person. I stared at it. 1 second, 2, 3. The room was completely silent. I folded the paper back up. The same creases. The same careful quarters. I slipped it into my breast pocket. Right where I used to keep my mealtime sheets, right over my heart. Thank you, Lily, I said. She smiled, ran back to her chair. No one said a word. Beatrice buried her face in her napkin. Her shoulders shook. Gerald Hayes, the pastor from Diane and Gregory's church, a man in his early 60s who'd come here tonight, expecting cake and coffee, bowed his head. I saw his lips moving, praying maybe, or just trying to process what he was witnessing. Franklin stared out the window, at nothing, just stared. My favorite person. I touched the paper through my pocket, felt the edges, the folds. I thought to myself, this is the most important piece of paper I've ever held. Walter stood up for the 2nd time tonight. He didn't reach for his envelope this time. He reached for his laptop, opened it, turned it toward the projector that was still sitting on my coffee table. The screen changed. White background, official-looking database, Pennsylvania Department of State, corporate entity search. Walter typed something, hit enter. A result appeared. This, Walter said, pointing at the screen, is a licensed private lending entity registered right here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The entity name was in bold, Keystone Capital Solutions, LLC. Below that, a list of officers, registered agent, filing date. Walter clicked something. The registered agent's full name appeared. Gregory Michael Carroll. The room shifted, not physically, but I felt it, like air pressure dropping before a storm. This entity, Walter continued, also happens to be the exact entity holding the $120,000 private note against the owner's own wife. He let that sit. Compounding at 18% interest annually. Diane's head turned, slow, like a gear that hadn't been oiled in years. She looked at the screen, at Gregory's name, at the LLC registration. Then she looked at her husband. You are my lender, she said. Not a question, a statement. Gregory didn't answer. You are charging me 18%. Still no answer. Her own husband, charging her 18% annual interest through a company he registered under his own name. while planning to pocket $45,000 from her father's property. Franklin muttered something under his breath. I didn't catch the words, but I caught the tone. Gerald Hayes put a firm hand on Franklin's shoulder, steadying him, keeping him seated. Diane was still staring at Gregory. How long, she asked. Gregory finally looked at her. How long what? How long have you been my lender? 6 months. 6 months. She said it like she was tasting the words, testing them. We've been married 14 years. You've been my lender for 6 months. You needed the money. At 18%, that's market rate for unsecured. I'm your wife. Gregory's jaw tightened. And you were drowning. I threw you a line. You threw me an anchor, Diane said, quiet, with interest. The room didn't breathe. Edward was staring at Gregory like he'd never seen him before, like he was looking at a stranger who'd been wearing his brother-in-law's face for 14 years. Walter closed the laptop, sat back down. Diane kept staring at her husband. You called my father a failure. Put it on a screen, in front of 40 people. Gregory said nothing. While charging me 18% interest on money I borrowed from you, while setting up a $45,000 commission on his house, while her voice broke. She didn't cry, just stopped talking. Gregory stood up, again, for the third time tonight. I need air, he said. Same words as before, same careful, neutral expression, same measured walk toward the door. But this time when he left, Diane didn't watch him go. She just sat there, staring at the table, at the 3 folders, at the timesheet still spread across the wood, at the projector screen still glowing, at her life laid out in receipts and photocopies and corporate filings. I touched the paper in my breast pocket again. My favorite person. My own husband, Diane said, almost to herself, like she was trying to see if the words were real. My own husband is charging me 18% interest on my debts. They were real. Dorothy Brennan stood up for the second time tonight, and when she spoke, her voice carried the precision of someone who had written down exactly what she heard. I have one more piece to add, she said. The room turned toward her. 3 weeks ago, Dorothy said. Around 7 in the evening, I was out watering the hydrangeas near the property line when I overheard Gregory speaking loudly on his phone, on his back deck. Gregory's head snapped up. Dorothy pulled out her phone, opened it, tapped something. I typed what I heard directly into my notes app, immediately after, while it was still fresh. She held up her phone, showed the screen to the room. Date stamp visible at the top. September 29th, 2023, 7:14 p.m. I'm going to read this word for word, she said. She read, the old man won't know a thing. The lot value alone is $2.3 million if we tear down and rebuild. We just need his signature. He's on crutches. He's isolated. It's the right time. The room went completely still. Dorothy set her phone down on the table, face up, so everyone could see the timestamp. He's isolated, Franklin repeated. His voice was low, dangerous. It's the right time. The entire room pivoted to stare at Gregory. He said nothing, just looked at the wall. He's isolated? I said the words out loud, tasted them. He said that because I was on crutches, because I live alone, because he thought I was weak. I stood up, slowly. My crutches were leaning against the table. I didn't reach for them. I walked. 3 steps. Just 3. Without the crutches. My leg hurt, but it held. I walked into this room tonight on crutches, I said. I'm still standing. Gregory looked at me, then looked away. Franklin's face had gone red, not from embarrassment, from anger. 2.3 million, he said. Tear down and rebuild. Beatrice made a sound, half gasp, half sob. Edward was staring at Gregory with an expression I'd never seen on my son's face before. Pure contempt. Diane sat frozen. She hadn't moved since Dorothy started reading. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls were pressing in. That's when Franklin stood up. He's 70 years old, retired welder, still built like a man who spent 40 years carrying steel. He pointed, thick finger, toward the corner near the kitchen pantry door. Who the hell is that? He said. Everyone turned. There was a man standing there. Tailored charcoal suit, expensive. The kind you don't see at working-class family dinners in Homestead. He'd been there all night, standing quiet. I'd noticed him when people were arriving, thought he was someone's plus one, someone's colleague who tagged along. But he'd been standing there for 3 hours, silent, watching, out of place. Franklin walked toward him. Sir, what's your name, and why are you at this man's private birthday party? The man in the suit looked at Gregory. Gregory cleared his throat. He's a professional colleague of mine. He was just in the area. In the area? Franklin cut him off. At a private family dinner, holding a legal folder under his arm. The man was holding a leather folder. I saw it now. Brown leather, documents visible at the edge. Harold Bennett stood up, squinted at the man. Recognition flashed across his face. That, Harold said slowly, is Vincent Holloway. The room shifted again. CEO of Holloway Development, Harold continued. The firm currently buying up residential blocks down near the old works. The man in the suit, Vincent Holloway, apparently didn't move. Franklin looked at Gregory, then at Holloway, then back at Gregory. You brought the developer, Franklin said, to the birthday party. The developer you're planning to sell Ray's house to. Gregory said nothing. Holloway looked at the back door, 10 feet away, clear path. He took a step. Walter moved, fast for a 68-year-old man. He stepped into the path between Holloway and the door. Sir, Walter said. His voice was calm, professional, the voice he uses in depositions. You've just witnessed material financial disclosures regarding a real estate transaction you may be a primary party to. I'd strongly advise you to stay right here. Holloway stopped. I'm not a party to anything, he said. First words he'd spoken all night. Deep voice, educated. The kind of voice that's used to getting what it wants. You're standing in this man's kitchen, Walter said, at a private family gathering holding a folder with his address on it. Holloway looked down at the folder, then back at Walter. I was invited, he said. By whom? Silence. By whom? Walter repeated. Holloway looked at Gregory. Gregory was staring at his phone. I think, Walter said, you should sit down, Mr. Holloway. We're going to have some questions for you in a moment. The Macan in the suit froze. He'd been standing in my kitchen for 3 hours watching this whole thing unfold, thinking nobody would notice a stranger at a family party, thinking he could just slip out when things got uncomfortable. But we'd noticed. Franklin pulled out a chair, set it in the middle of the room. Sit, he said. It wasn't a request. Holloway looked at the door, at Walter blocking it, at Franklin standing beside the chair, at 40 pairs of eyes staring at him. He sat. I looked around my room. 40 people. Some I'd known for decades, some I'd met tonight. 3 folders sitting open on the table. Timesheets spread across the wood. Documents and photocopies and bank records. A commercial developer sitting in a kitchen chair in the middle of my living room, holding a folder with my address on it. A son-in-law who couldn't look his wife in the eye. A daughter who'd put me on a screen and called me a failure. And Lily's drawing in my breast pocket. My favorite person. I looked at Walter. He nodded. And I still wasn't done. Walter unsealed a second envelope, distinct from the initial trust paperwork. Different color, different seal. The room went absolutely still. He pulled out a document. Multiple pages, clipped together. Official stamps visible on the edges. 3 weeks ago, Walter said, immediately following his conversation with his granddaughter, Mr. Kowalski came to my office and executed a formal trust amendment. He set the document on the table. This amendment supersedes all previous beneficiary designations, he said. It was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed with the trust records. Diane's hands were shaking. Walter cleared his throat, put on his reading glasses, the ones he uses for court documents. I'm going to read this verbatim, he said. He began, beneficiary distributions as amended, October 1st, 2023. That was 3 weeks ago. The day after Lily told me about the projector scheme while eating chocolate chip cookies. Walter continued, Diane Carroll, née Kowalski. He paused, looked up, made sure everyone was listening. $0. The room went dead silent. Not the kind of silence that happens when people are shocked. The kind that happens when people are witnessing something they knew was coming, but still can't quite believe. Diane stared at the table. $0. My daughter looked at that number the way you look at a furnace gauge when it reads exactly what you feared it would. No heat, left no pressure, nothing. Walter kept reading. Edward Kowalski, the Baldwin Borough residential property, has been deeded separately as previously documented. Edward was very still. Additionally, Walter said a cash distribution of $50,000 payable within 30 days of the grantor's death. Edward's eyes went wide. He hadn't known about the cash. $50,000 on top of the house. Beatrice put her hand over her mouth. Walter turned the page. Lily Carroll, he read. Diane's head came up. A $200,000 educational trust fund. The room shifted, everyone leaning forward now. Restricted solely for verified higher education expenses, Walter continued, completely bypassing parental oversight, managed exclusively by the successor trustee myself until she reaches age 18. He set the page down, looked at Diane. Your daughter's education is guaranteed, he said, regardless of what happens to you or your husband, regardless of your debts, regardless of anything. That money is untouchable. By you, by Gregory, By anyone except Lily when she's old enough to use it for college. Diane said nothing. I looked at Lily. She was sitting at the end of the table, drawing shapes on a cheap paper napkin with a crayon she'd found somewhere. Circles, stars, a crooked house. Completely unaware that her name had just been read aloud in front of 40 adults. Unaware that her grandfather had just guaranteed her future while erasing her mother's. Unaware of any of it, just drawing. Walter picked up the final page. The entire remaining residue of the estate, he read, including but not limited to the homestead residential property, all remaining financial assets, and any proceeds from the sale or transfer of said property shall be transferred directly to the Pittsburgh Senior Support Fund. He looked up. That's a local nonprofit, he explained. They provide aid to isolated low-income elderly residents, home health services, meal delivery, medical transportation, the kind of help people need when they're alone and can't afford private care. He set the document down. The kind of help, he said quietly, that Mr. Kowalski was accused of needing tonight. The kind that was supposed to cost $3 million, according to the projector. No one spoke. Franklin was smiling. Grim smile. The kind you give when justice gets served cold. Gerald Hayes, the pastor, had his hands folded in front of him. Eyes closed, still praying maybe. Edward was staring at the document, like he couldn't quite process it. Gregory was gone. I realized that now. He'd slipped out at some point, probably when Walter was reading. Just left. Didn't say goodbye to his wife. Didn't check on his daughter. Just left. Vincent Holloway, the developer, was still sitting in the chair in the middle of the room. He looked like a man who'd just watched a business deal collapse in real time and couldn't figure out where it went wrong. Diane hadn't moved. She was staring at Lily. Just staring. Lily drew a sun. Big one. Yellow crayon. Rays coming out like spokes. Same kind of sun she had drawn on my birthday card. The one in my breast pocket. Diane watched her daughter's little fingers. The way they gripped the crayon. The way they moved across the cheap paper napkin. I'd seen Diane look at Lily hundreds of times over the years. At birthday parties. At Christmas. At family dinners. But this was different. This wasn't the look of a mother watching her child perform. Wasn't the look of someone cataloging behavior for future reference. Wasn't calculated. It was just a mother looking at her daughter. For the first time all night. Maybe for the first time in years. Lily finished the sun, held up the napkin, looked at it, smiled. "Grandpa," she said, "look what I made." I looked. It was a house, with a sun, and two stick figures in front of it. One tall, one small. "That's beautiful, Lily," I said. She beamed, set the napkin down, started drawing something else. Diane watched her, kept watching. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They were just still, resting on the table, empty. My daughter looked at Lily, watched her little fingers scribbling with a crayon on a cheap napkin. This was the first time tonight I saw her look at her child like a mother instead of an actor in her financial theater. Edward stood up from his chair, completely unprompted. No one had called on him. No one had asked. The room shifted its attention to a voice that hadn't spoken all night. "My son is 42 years old. Electrician. Quiet man. The kind who fixes things without announcing it. The kind who shows up when you need him and doesn't ask for credit." He looked at his sister. "I want to say something," he said. His voice was flat, like mine, not yelling, just profoundly sad. "I remember 6th grade," he said. "Old South Side School, before they tore it down." Diane went very still. "You were in 4th," Edward continued. "There were these kids, rich kids, from the Hill. Their parents had money, clean money, office jobs, not mill work." He paused. "They called you something every day, for a whole semester." Diane closed her eyes. "Mill worker's dirty kid," Edward said. "That's what they called you?" Beatrice made a small sound. She remembered. She'd been there. Helped me talk to the school about it. "I remember finding you," Edward said, "hiding in the downstairs bathroom after school, sobbing into your sleeves. You could barely get the words out." He looked straight at her. "You said I just want to be normal. I don't want people to know where we're from." The room was absolutely silent. "I got it," Edward said. "I understood why you were ashamed of Dad, ashamed of where we lived, ashamed of this kitchen." He gestured at the room, at the old Formica table, at the cabinets from 1983. "I felt it too," he said. "Every time someone asked where I lived, every time someone asked what my dad did, I felt it." He stopped, took a breath. "But then I watched Dad come home from a double shift, 11 at night, then 7 in the morning, 16 hours straight, and he had blood blisters on his palms from the work gloves wearing through." Edward's voice cracked, just slightly, and I stopped being ashamed. 2 kids, same bathroom floor, same shame eating them up. But only one of them looked at their father's bloodied hands and decided those hands were worth more than a rich kid's opinion. Edward pointed at the 3 folders on the table. An old schoolyard scar, he said, looking directly at Diane, doesn't give you the right to do this to him. Diane didn't answer, didn't defend herself. Her shoulders just slumped. I watched something shift in her face. Not anger, not shame, something else. Like she was fighting something inside that she didn't have a name for yet. Edward sat back down. The room stayed quiet for 10 seconds, 20. Then Gregory pushed his chair back, stood up, all the way up, didn't look at his wife, didn't look at me, just kept his eyes locked on Walter. I need to speak with you privately, he said. Walter didn't move. The room is still in session, Gregory. I'm aware. Gregory walked down the hallway toward the front door. Didn't run, just walked. Measured steps. Walter paused, looked at me. I nodded. Walter stood, followed Gregory out of the room. The door closed behind them. Diane was left sitting at the center of the table, completely alone, for the first time all night. No husband beside her, no Gregory leaning in with strategy, no plan backing her up. Just 40 pairs of eyes and the weight of her own choices pressing down. Vincent Holloway, the developer, glanced toward the door, like he was calculating whether he could make it. Harold saw it. You should probably stay right where you are, Mr. Holloway, Harold said. Holloway stayed. We waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Beatrice fidgeted with her napkin. Franklin stared out the window. Dorothy checked her watch. 8 minutes. Then the door opened. Gregory came back in, quiet, reclaimed his seat next to Diane. Walter followed, sat back down in his corner. Gregory leaned toward his wife, muttered something out of the corner of his mouth. Low, but not low enough. The trust was set up in 2010, he said. The exact same year you told him this house looked poor. Diane turned her head, looked at him. What? 2010, Gregory repeated. Walter just showed me the filing date, March 18th. He looked at her, really looked at her. Same year, Diane. You told your father his house looked poor, and he filed a trust to make sure you could never force him to sell it. Diane stared at him. I didn't, she started. You did, Gregory said. He remembers. She turned toward me. I didn't say anything, just looked back. She shook her head. I don't remember saying that. But I do, I said. Quiet, calm. You came over for Sunday dinner. March 10th, 2010. You'd just gotten promoted at work. Marketing director. You were excited, told us about the new office, the view, the benefits. I kept my voice even. Then you looked around this kitchen, this exact kitchen, and you said, Dad, when are you going to do something about this place? It looks poor. Diane's face went white. Those were your exact words, I said. It looks poor. You laughed when you said it, like it was a joke. I looked at her. I filed the trust 8 days later. The room was silent. My daughter heard her husband's words and didn't answer. She didn't remember saying the house looked poor. But I did. I remembered every single syllable. I reached into the very bottom of the black folder and pulled out one final envelope. Thin and small, the kind that holds a single page. I broke the seal, pulled out a bank statement. PNC Bank, savings account. Not the one I use for regular bills, a separate one. I set it flat on the table. In 1987, I said the month my daughter entered first grade, I opened a separate savings account at the credit union. I tapped the statement. Every single month, without fail, I deposited $200. I never touched it. Diane was staring at the paper. 38 years, I said, $200 a month, compounded with interest. I pointed at the bottom line. It stands at $340,000. The room went quiet. I kept that account alive for the day my daughter actually needed help. Not wanted it. Needed it. I looked at Diane. There's a difference, I said, between a daughter who's drowning and a daughter who just wants a bigger boat. I picked up the statement, folded it, put it back in the envelope. Tonight is my answer to that question, I said. That account is being wired to the Pittsburgh Senior Support Fund tomorrow morning. Pastor Gerald Hayes stood up, quiet, respectful. That specific fund, he said. I need to say this publicly. Ray has been donating to it anonymously for 8 years. $24,000 total so far. For elderly residents who are isolated and need help with meals, medical transportation, home care. He looked at me. I nodded. He sat back down. Diane was staring at the envelope in my hand. I could see her doing math. $340,000. Her debt was $500,000. The account wouldn't even cover it. But that wasn't why I built it. Before I tell you about the person who knew what was coming and stayed silent, I need to ask, should family members speak up when they see something wrong or stay out of it? Comment A, if they should speak up, B, if they should stay out, and add one reason in 5 to 10 words. A quick note, some details ahead are adapted for storytelling to convey the lesson. Beatrice stood up. My sister, 61 years old. She's always been the quietest one in the family, the one who listens, the one who keeps things to herself. She cleared her throat. I need to say something, she said. Her voice was shaking. I began suspecting Diane's intentions 5 years ago, she said. She started calling me out of the blue, asking probing questions. Beatrice looked at Diane. What kind of life insurance policies does Dad have? Is the mortgage on the house fully cleared? How much equity does he have built up? Diane closed her eyes. I stayed silent, Beatrice said, because it was my brother's business, not mine. She looked at me. I should have said something. That's on me. She turned back to Diane. And I should have told you she was digging around. That's also on me. She sat back down. The room was silent. I reached across the space between us. Put my hand on Beatrice's shoulder. You're speaking now, I said. That's what matters. She nodded, didn't look up. I looked around the room. How many people in this room knew a little piece of the puzzle and kept it to themselves? How much silence does it take to let a night like this happen? Dorothy had heard Gregory on the phone 3 weeks ago. She spoke up tonight. Harold had been accidentally copied on the email. He spoke up tonight. Beatrice had suspected for 5 years. She spoke up tonight. But how many years could have been different if someone had spoken up sooner? I wasn't angry at Beatrice. She was protecting her brother. That's what family does. But it made me wonder. Franklin was watching me. He'd been quiet most of the night, just listening, supporting, being there. Edward was staring at the table. At the timesheet still spread across the wood. Diane was completely still, hands folded in her lap, eyes down. Gregory had slipped out again. I realized that now. He'd left during Beatrice's confession, just walked out. Again. Maybe he knew what was coming. Maybe he couldn't watch anymore. Vincent Holloway, the developer, was still sitting in his chair, still holding his leather folder, still trapped. Walter was watching everything, taking mental notes, the way lawyers do. Lily was asleep now, head on the table, crayon still in her hand. My granddaughter was only 9 years old. She had no idea about the conflicts, secrets, and mistakes that had shaped our family. She'd wake up tomorrow and draw another picture, maybe another son, maybe another house. And she'd never know that tonight her grandfather gave away $340,000 that could have been hers someday. But she had her trust fund, $200,000 for college, protected, untouchable. She was taken care of. The rest of it, the house, the savings, the land, my grandfather left me. All of it was going to people who actually needed it. People who were isolated, people who were alone, people who couldn't afford help. People like me, according to the projector screen. I looked at that screen, still glowing white, still set up on my coffee table, still showing the last slide Diane had pulled up. If you have any self-respect left, I touched the paper in my breast pocket. Lily's drawing, my favorite person. I had plenty of self-respect left. I looked around a room filled with people I loved, people I'd known for decades, people who'd eaten at this table, people who'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays in this kitchen. How many of them knew a little piece of the puzzle and kept it to themselves? How much silence did it take to let tonight happen? Diane stood up for the first time since sitting down at the beginning of the evening. Not to scream, not to defend herself, just to ask a direct question. The kitchen fell completely quiet. She looked at me, really looked at me. Not the way you look at someone you're trying to convince. The way you look at someone when you're actually asking. Dad, she said. Her voice was different, smaller. Not the marketing director voice, not the confident voice from the projector presentation, just a daughter's voice. You could have just said no, she said. Any single time over the last 20 years, you could have just told me no. She paused. Why didn't you? I didn't answer immediately. I touched the paper in my breast pocket. Lily's drawing. My favorite person. The edges were soft now from being folded and unfolded. I looked up at my daughter. Because you were my daughter, I said. And I kept thinking you'd find your way back. She blinked. Back to what? Back to knowing what actually matters. The room was silent. Diane stood there for another 5 seconds. Then she sank back into her chair, slow, like someone who'd just run a race and had nothing left. She didn't offer another word, didn't defend herself, didn't explain, didn't argue, just sat there. That was the first entirely honest exchange we'd had all night. Maybe the first we'd had in years. No script, no agenda. Just a raw question and an honest answer. Because you were my daughter. I said it out loud, and the moment the words left my mouth, I knew it was the very last time I'd ever use that as an excuse. Gregory was back now, sitting beside her again, but he wasn't looking at her, just staring at the table. Edward was watching his sister. His face was hard to read. Not angry, not pitying, just sad. Franklin was gripping his glass, knuckles white. Beatrice had her hands folded in prayer position, eyes closed. The room felt heavier now, like we'd all been holding our breath for hours and were just now remembering how to exhale. Then I heard small footsteps. Lily. She'd woken up, pushed herself up from the table, rubbed her eyes. She walked over to her mother. For the first time all evening, climbed onto the chair beside Diane, looked right into her face. Mommy, she said. Her voice was completely normal, unprompted. Just a child asking a question. Does Grandpa have to pay for me to love him? Diane froze. Her lips trembled. Lily kept going. Because I love him for free. She tilted her head. Is that okay? Diane didn't say anything. She just pulled Lily into her arms, held her incredibly tight, buried her face in her daughter's shoulder. For the first time all night, she held someone with real warmth, not calculated, not strategic, just a mother holding her child. Lily hugged her back, patted her mother's hair, the way kids do when they don't understand why adults are crying but want to help anyway. It's okay, Mommy, Lily said, soft. I love you for free, too. Diane's shoulders shook. The room stayed quiet. I watched my daughter hold my granddaughter. Watched a 9-year-old child give her mother a lesson that 40 years of living hadn't taught her. I love him for free. 9 years old. Didn't need a class. Didn't need to be taught. She just knew what her mother had spent 38 years refusing to understand. Edward was staring at Lily. His eyes were wet. Franklin had set his glass down, covered his mouth with his hand. Beatrice was crying again, quiet tears running down her face. Gerald Hayes, the pastor, had his hands clasped together, watching, bearing witness. Dorothy had her napkin pressed to her eyes. Walter was very still, just observing, taking it all in. Vincent Holloway, the developer, looked like he wanted to disappear. Like he'd walked into something far heavier than a real estate deal and didn't know how to get out. Lily pulled back from her mother, looked at her face. Are you sad? She asked. Diane nodded, couldn't speak. Do you want me to draw you a picture? Lily asked. Pictures help when you're sad. Diane pulled her close again, held her. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that. Lily nodded, climbed down from the chair, went back to her spot at the end of the table, found her crayon, started drawing. Completely normal. Completely innocent, completely unaware that she'd just said the most important thing anyone had said all night. I love him for free. 4 words, from a 9-year-old. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at Lily, watching her draw. Her hands were shaking. For a brief moment, she wasn't a desperate debtor playing a part. She was just a mother, watching her daughter, realizing something she should have known all along. Gregory reached over, put his hand on Diane's shoulder. She didn't shrug it off this time, just let it sit there. The room was quiet for a long time. I don't know how long. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 2 minutes. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. We all just sat there, 40 people in my kitchen, watching a 9-year-old girl draw a picture for her mother because she loved her for free. I love him for free. 9 years old. Didn't need a class, didn't need to be taught. She just knew. Franklin stood up at the far end of the extended table, looked down the line at me. His voice carried the weight of 40 years working the same mill floor. Ray, he said, I've heard enough tonight. He raised his hands, and he clapped. Slow, deliberate, each clap echoing loud through the silent house. 1, 2, 3. No one else moved. 4, 5, 6. Then after maybe 10 seconds, a young couple near the kitchen door stood up. I didn't know them well. They'd moved into the neighborhood maybe 6 months ago, early 30s. No deep ties to our family. But they'd been here tonight. They'd heard everything. They started clapping too. 3 people. That was it. Franklin and the 2 young neighbors. The rest of the room stayed completely still. Not because they disagreed, but because the weight of what they'd witnessed was too heavy for applause. This wasn't a triumph to celebrate. This was necessary surgery. The kind you survive but don't cheer for. Franklin kept clapping for maybe 20 seconds. Then he stopped, sat back down. The young couple sat too. The room went quiet again. I looked at Franklin, gave him a brief nod. No words necessary. 3 people clapping. I didn't need 40. I didn't need a standing ovation. 3 people who didn't owe me a thing that was plenty. I stood up, fully, for the first time all night. I didn't reach for a file folder, didn't reach for evidence, didn't need it anymore. I balanced on my right leg, braced the crutch, stood completely straight. My back hurt, my leg hurt, but I stood. I looked around the room, took in every face. Dorothy still holding her napkin. Beatrice hands folded. Edward watching me with something like pride. Gerald Hayes, the pastor, with his head bowed. Harold, Walter, the guests I'd known for decades, the ones I'd just met tonight. Vincent Holloway, the developer, still trapped in his chair by the kitchen door, looking like he wished he'd never accepted Gregory's invitation. Lily half asleep against her mother's side, head on Diane's shoulder, completely peaceful. And finally my eyes settled on Diane. She was looking at me, not defiant anymore, not calculating, just looking. I took a breath. My voice came out flat, the same tone I'd used to read the timesheets, the same tone I'd used for 42 years calling out furnace temperatures and pressure readings. No emotion, just the facts. Diane, I said, you put up a slide tonight that called me a retired failure. You projected it in front of this room, in front of our family, our neighbors, our friends. I paused. So let me give you my answer in this exact same room. The room was absolutely silent. You said I was the biggest bill of your life, I said. I looked at the 3 folders on the table, at the timesheets still spread across the wood, at the evidence of 40 years. Tonight, I said, everyone here has seen the truth. I looked back at her. You are the most painful debt of mine. Diane didn't move, didn't speak. But I've paid it, I said. I placed my hand flat on the black folder. The last one, the one that had held the land deed, the savings account, Edward's house, all of it. I am completely done paying. I picked up my briefcase, the leather one, the one Diane had bought me in 2010. So you'd look more professional, she'd said when she gave it to me. For retirement meetings, I snapped it shut. The latches clicked loud in the quiet room. I closed the leather briefcase, the one she bought me in 2010, so I'd look more professional for retirement meetings. Tonight, I looked very professional. I looked at Walter, gave him a firm nod. He nodded back. That was it. That was everything. I'd come here tonight expecting a birthday party, expecting cake and coffee and maybe some bad jokes from Franklin about getting old. Instead, I'd gotten a $3 million invoice on a projector screen, and I'd answered it with receipts, with timesheets, with bank statements and property deeds and 40 years of documentation, with the truth. Diane was still staring at me. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. Lily stirred against her shoulder, mumbled something in her sleep. Diane looked down at her daughter, then back at me. She opened her mouth, like she was going to say something. Then she closed it. What was there to say? Gregory was gone again. I realized that now. He'd slipped out during Franklin's applause, just left his wife sitting there, alone. Edward stood up, walked over to me, put his hand on my shoulder. Dad, he said, quiet. You okay? I nodded. I'm okay. He squeezed my shoulder once, then stepped back. Franklin was watching me. Beatrice was crying again. Dorothy had her hands clasped together. The room felt different now, lighter somehow, like we'd all been holding our breath for hours and could finally exhale. I picked up my crutch, adjusted my weight, looked one more time at the table, at the folders, at the evidence, at the 40 people who'd witnessed this, at my daughter holding my granddaughter, at the projector still glowing white, at the briefcase in my hand. I thought to myself she was right. Tonight I looked very professional. 3 measured steps from the front door was all it took for the reality of the situation to catch up with us. I stopped dead in my tracks when the sound finally broke the suffocating quiet of the room. It wasn't a dramatic sob, nor was it some theatrical performative wail meant to garner unearned sympathy from the remaining onlookers. It was something far more visceral and raw, a low, deflating hiss of sheer exhaustion. It sounded exactly like the pressurized air slowly escaping from a heavy-duty tire that had been holding its breath, maintaining its deceptive shape against immense crushing forces for 38 long years. I paused, freezing mid-motion. I slowly tilted my head back toward the living room, my body protesting the slight shift in weight. Diane was still sitting frozen at the dining room table, looking smaller than she ever had. Lily was fast asleep, her heavy little head pressed deeply against her mother's slumped shoulder. Behind them, the old projector kept humming its monotonous tune, casting a harsh, blinding white glow directly across her back, projecting nothing but empty, unfeeling light now that the slides had run out. But Diane wasn't looking at the projector, nor was she looking at the scattering guests. Her eyes were locked onto my shirt pocket. Specifically, she was staring at the crumpled corner of bright yellow crayon paper that was peeking out over the fabric stitched across my chest. It was the drawing Lily had proudly handed me earlier in the evening, decorated with clumsy, erratic borders and those innocent, unevenly block-lettered words, "my favorite person." As she stared at that tiny piece of paper, the last of her carefully constructed armor completely evaporated. Her face dropped heavily into her open hands. There was absolutely no sound this time. There were no loud laments, no desperate pleas for forgiveness, and no attempts to explain away the decades of calculation. There were only her shoulders shaking violently in the dimming light, and the sight of hot, genuine tears running freely between her tightly pressed fingers. It was without a doubt the very first piece of genuine, unvarnished emotion I had seen from my daughter all night. It wasn't a curated performance designed to manipulate the crowd, nor was it a cold defensive calculation meant to salvage her shattered reputation. It was just a human being finally breaking apart under the immense weight of her own choices. Franklin appeared silently beside me at the threshold of the door. He didn't look back at the table. His steady gaze was fixed entirely on the exit. "Ray," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the hum of the projector, "you don't owe her your witness." I looked over at his weathered face and gave him a slow, deliberate nod. He was absolutely right. I didn't owe her that. I didn't owe her my presence, my anger, or my validation while she picked up the pieces of the narrative she had burned to the ground. Yet I stood there anyway for maybe 90 seconds, balanced precariously on my aluminum crutches. I watched my grown daughter cry into her hands. I watched Gerald Hayes, the local pastor who had known our family through its darkest chapters, quietly walk over from the corner of the room and take a seat in the empty chair right beside her. He didn't offer any platitudes. He didn't try to break the silence with rehearsed scripture, and he didn't reach out to touch her trembling shoulder. He just sat there in the quiet. The ministry of presence, they called it. Just being there so a person doesn't have to sit with their ruin entirely alone. As I watched her break, I searched my chest for some kind of profound emotional response, but I found nothing. I didn't feel a twisted sense of satisfaction or vindication watching her walls crumble. I didn't feel a sudden surge of paternal pity either. Instead, I felt the exact way a man feels when he finally walks into a bank and makes the absolute last payment on a crushing, decades-old loan. You aren't happy. You aren't sad. You don't jump for joy, and you don't weep for the money that's gone. You are just fundamentally, beautifully done. I shifted my weight on the crutches, the rubber tips clicking softly against the hardwood floor, as I turned my body fully toward the cold night waiting outside. Then the soft rhythmic patter of small footsteps echoed from behind me. "Grandpa Ray." It was Lily. The commotion and the sudden shift in the room's energy had gently nudged her awake. She had climbed down from her mother's lap without anyone noticing and was now walking toward me across the carpet. She looked tiny in her white dress, which was now heavily grass-stained around the hem from playing outside earlier. She was rubbing her eyes with the back of her small fist, blinking against the light. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice tilting upward. I stopped. I braced my weight against the crutches and looked down into her clear, untainted eyes. "I am," I said softly. "Forever?" It was that heartbreaking 4-year-old directness, that beautiful 9-year-old honesty wrapped in a toddler's voice. Children don't know how to dress up a terrifying question in polite euphemisms. They don't know how to soften a blow or hide their fears behind clever vocabulary. They just ask what their hearts need to know. "Not forever," I said, ensuring my voice was as steady and solid as a rock. "How about we go fishing every single Sunday, just you and me?" The cloudy confusion vanished from her face instantly, her eyes widening. "Really? Highland Park." I told her, a small, genuine warmth finally cracking through my exhaustion. "There's a real good quiet spot right by the reservoir where the bluegills bite." "Can I bring my fishing rod?" she asked eagerly, taking a step closer. "The pink one with the little sparkles?" "Yes," I said, nodding. "You bring that exact one." She beamed a radiant, joyful expression that completely ignored the heavy tragedy anchoring the rest of the room. Without another word, Lily threw her small arms tightly around my waist, burying her face into my coat. She squeezed me with everything her little arms could muster, holding on as if she could anchor me to the spot. Then, just as quickly as she had arrived, she let go, turned around, and ran right back to her mother's side. I looked at Diane one last time. She had finally taken her hands away from her face and was watching me over Gerald's broad shoulder. Her mascara was completely ruined, leaving dark, messy tracks down her pale cheeks. Her face looked entirely drained of color, hollowed out by the realization of what had just transpired. She opened her mouth slightly, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, as if there was some combination of words left in the English language that could fix, mend, or rewrite the history we had just closed. I waited. I gave her the space of a heartbeat. She closed her mouth again, her jaw tightening. I couldn't blame her. What was there left to say? The ledgers had been balanced, the truths had been spoken, and the illusions had been shattered. I turned my back on the room, leaned heavily into my crutches, and pushed open the heavy front door. I stepped out of the house and into the biting, crisp October cold, letting the screen door click shut behind us. The young couple from earlier in the evening, the two neighbors who had courageously stood up and clapped alongside Franklin when the truth was laid bare, were still standing by their sedan, parked in my driveway. The woman noticed me coming down the steps and gave me a small, respectful wave. I nodded back to her a silent acknowledgement. We didn't speak a single word across the dark yard. We didn't need to. It was just a brief, profound moment of quiet solidarity between strangers who had shared a glimpse of something raw. Then they quietly got into their car, started the engine, and drove away into the night. Franklin followed me closely down the walkway, his heavy boots crunching on the fallen leaves. "Let me drive you home," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Yeah," I replied, exhaling a long plume of white mist into the autumn air. "Thanks, Frank." We walked slowly to his old truck. He stepped ahead, opened the heavy passenger door wide, and helped me navigate the high step up into the cab. He carefully took my aluminum crutches from my hands, walked around to the bed of the truck, and laid them securely in the back. He climbed into the driver's seat, threw the truck into reverse, and we smoothly pulled out of the gravel driveway. As we accelerated down the street, I adjusted my position and looked out into the passenger side mirror. I watched my house get smaller and smaller with every passing second. I saw the warm, deceptive lights glowing in the windows, casting shadows of the people who were still trapped inside, lingering in the aftermath. 40 people had driven to that house tonight, thinking they were coming to celebrate a happy milestone, a routine birthday. Instead, they had been made to witness something else entirely, the slow, deliberate dismantling of a lifelong lie. Franklin drove in absolute silence for several blocks, letting the heaters slowly chase the October chill from the cabin. Then, without taking his eyes off the dark road ahead, he finally spoke. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm okay," I said, and to my own surprise, I realized I genuinely meant it. "That was a hell of a thing you did in there, Ray. A hell of a thing. Had to be done, Frank. It just had to be done." "Still," he muttered, shaking his head slightly as he navigated a turn. "A hell of a thing." We turned onto Penn Avenue, the streetlights blinking rhythmically across the dashboard as we headed directly toward my small apartment in Lawrenceville. "What now?" Franklin asked quietly. The city sounds beginning to hum around us. I reached into my coat pocket and touched the drawing Lily had given me. I let my fingertips trace the rough texture of the paper and the smooth, distinct ridges of the hardened crayon wax. "Now I go fishing with my granddaughter," I said, looking out at the passing storefronts, "every single Sunday." Franklin smiled, a small, knowing expression that crinkled the edges of his eyes. "That sounds about right, Ray. That sounds exactly right." We drove past the massive skeletal structure of the old steel mill. It was completely dark now, an empty shadow against the night sky. It had been cold and dark for 14 long years, but as we passed it, I could still see it perfectly, alive in my mind. I could still see the blinding roar of the furnaces, the exhausting, bone-weary night shifts, and the angry, painful blood blisters that used to cover the palms of my hands. 42 years of my youth and strength I gave to that unfeeling place, and 38 years of my heart, my patience, and my endurance I gave to my daughter. But tonight, sitting in that suffocating room under the white light of the projector, I had finally closed the books. "You think she'll change?" Franklin asked after a long pause, his voice cutting through my memories. "Diane, I mean, you think a night like tonight will actually change her?" I thought about his question seriously, watching the shadows dance across the truck's ceiling. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe she will, maybe she won't." "But you gave her the chance." "I did what I could do," I said, letting go of the outcome entirely. "The rest of it is up to her." We finally pulled up to the curb outside my brick apartment building. Franklin shifted the truck into park, the engine idling with a low, familiar rumble. You need some help getting all the way inside? He asked, turning to face me. I got it, I said, reaching for the door handle. He climbed out, retrieved my crutches from the back, and handed them to me as I maneuvered my way down from the high passenger seat. I stood on the pavement, steadying myself, feeling the sting of the cold air on my face. Ray, he called out before closing his door. I turned back to look at him through the open window. You did good tonight, he said, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. Your old man would be damn proud of you. I gave him a tight nod, finding myself suddenly unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He gave me a brief wave, rolled up his window, and drove off down Penn Avenue, his taillights disappearing into the Lawrenceville traffic. I stood completely alone on the concrete sidewalk, listening to the distant sounds of the city. I looked up at the familiar facade of my building, tracing the windows up to the third floor where my apartment sat. It was a small space. It was undeniably quiet, and it was entirely empty. But as I adjusted my crutches and took my first step toward the entrance, a profound sense of relief washed over me. It was mine. It was completely paid for. There was no lingering debt up there, no unpayable emotional mortgages, and no impossible obligations left to fulfill. I thought back to Lily's innocent, piercing question. Are you leaving forever? I had told her no, and I meant every single word of it. I wasn't abandoning the world, and I wasn't running away forever. I was simply leaving. I was leaving behind the crushing weight I had been carrying on my back for nearly 4 decades. I was leaving behind the endless debt I had been desperately trying to pay off to a ledger that could never be balanced. I was leaving to go somewhere new. I just didn't happen to know exactly where that was yet, and for the first time in my life, that was perfectly fine. Inside the cabin of Franklin's old truck, the air was thick with the familiar, comforting scent of motor oil and stale coffee. He kept both of his weathered hands firmly on the steering wheel, his eyes locked onto the pavement ahead, choosing not to say much of anything at all. That is the ultimate truth about the men who have spent their lives working the exact same gritty factory floors they possess an innate understanding of when silence is infinitely better than words. They know when a man needs the quiet to process the wreckage left behind. We crossed the massive expanse of the Homestead Grays Bridge. Below us, the Monongahela River ran dark and flat, catching the very last remnants of the fading October twilight on its murky surface. I looked down at the moving water, the exact way I always did whenever I crossed this particular bridge, a deeply ingrained habit born from 40 long years of repetition. My father had crossed this exact same bridge every single morning at 6 o'clock sharp. His own father had done the very same before him. That made 3 generations of working men driving toward the roaring heat of the furnaces, and later driving away from them, carrying the exact same heavy weight in entirely different directions. But tonight was fundamentally different. Tonight I was driving away from the firelighter than I had arrived. Franklin turned smoothly onto 8th Avenue and brought the truck to a slow crawl at a glaring red light. He cleared his throat, breaking the heavy quiet of the cab. You eat anything tonight? A few deviled eggs? I said, my voice sounding distant even to myself. Maybe half a plate of potato salad before everything started falling apart. Dorothy makes damn good deviled eggs, he noted, keeping his eyes on the intersection. She does, I agreed. The traffic light shifted to green. We kept driving through the autumn evening. Franklin cleared his throat again. Gregory left without saying a single word to anyone, just stood up and walked straight out. I know, I replied. Holloway too, Franklin added. Harold actually called my cell while you were over there saying goodbye to little Lily. He said Holloway quietly slipped out the back door right after Walter finished reading the official trust amendment to the room. Let him go, I said, shaking my head slightly. Walter has absolutely everything documented down to the last penny. Holloway's not going anywhere that the Oversight Commission can't easily find him. Franklin nodded his head in agreement. He turned onto Ann Street, and my apartment building slowly came into view. The 3rd floor corner unit, its windows completely dark against the night sky. What about Diane? He asked quietly. I took a moment to think about the way she had looked at Lily toward the very end of the night. It wasn't the calculating look of a woman trying to salvage an inheritance, nor was it the performative sorrow of someone playing a victim. It was just a mother silently watching her innocent daughter draw a crude sun on a paper napkin with a crayon. I don't know yet, I said honestly. Fair answer, Franklin murmured. He pulled the truck into the small gravel lot and cut the ignition. Neither of us made a move to get out for a long moment. We just sat there as the engine cooled, ticking in the darkness. You know what your old man would say right now if he was sitting in this truck? Franklin asked suddenly. He'd probably say I used far too many manila folders, I muttered. Franklin laughed. It was the very first real, unburdened laugh I had heard from him all night long. It filled the cramped cab of the truck, echoing off the glass, and then slowly faded away, until we were sitting in the quiet once more. He'd be incredibly proud of you, Ray. I nodded my head. Couldn't find the words to answer that one. I began to climb out of the passenger side slowly, my joints aching from the stress of the evening. Franklin stepped out too, handing me my aluminum crutches without me even having to ask for them. I stood firmly on the cold pavement and looked up at my dark, unlit windows. It was just a small apartment. It was quiet, but it was entirely mine. There was no lingering debt up there. There were no impossible family obligations hanging over my head. There was no $3 million fraudulent invoice glowing maliciously on any projection wall. I reached up and touched the folded piece of paper resting in my breast pocket. I could feel the distinct, waxy texture of the crayon through the fabric of my shirt. Franklin, I said. He was already in the process of climbing back into the driver's seat of his truck. Hearing his name, he stopped and looked back over his shoulder at me. Thank you for being in that room tonight when it mattered. He didn't say a word. Instead, he just gave me the nod. The classic Pittsburgh nod. The one that conveys absolutely everything a working man can't figure out how to say out loud. He shifted into gear and drove away. I stood completely alone on the concrete sidewalk for a long moment before making a move to go inside. I looked up at the vast October sky stretching out over Lawrenceville. It was cold, clear, and absolutely full of bright stars that didn't care about corporate spreadsheets or digital projectors or the astronomical price of private nursing homes. For 40 long years, there were nights I didn't sleep because of the crushing weight I carried. And yet, here I was tonight, still standing on my own 2 feet. In the end, that was more than enough. Task 5.3. Franklin called the next morning before I'd finished my first coffee. His voice had that careful quality people use when they're about to ask something they're not sure you want to hear. Raymond, I ran into Diane yesterday at the grocery store on 8th. I said nothing, waited. She asked about you, how you were doing, if your leg was healing. Still nothing from me. The coffee had gone lukewarm in my hand. I told her you were doing fine. She didn't say anything else, just nodded and walked away. Franklin paused. Thought you should know. Thanks, Frank. Still want to meet for coffee? Yeah, I'll be there. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table. Diane had asked about me. Not at me. Not demanding something from me. Just asked how I was doing, the way you ask about someone you're worried you hurt. First time in 38 years, I didn't know what to do with that yet. So I just let it sit there with my cold coffee and didn't try to make it mean more than it was. Walter called on a Saturday afternoon while I was standing on the porch watching the light change over the park. Holloway's council made contact, he said. They want to discuss a voluntary cooperation agreement with the Pennsylvania Real Estate Commission. His people are calling it a proactive disclosure. They want reduced penalties in exchange for full records going back to 1989. Let them negotiate, I said. That's between him and the commission. There's something else. Walter's voice shifted slightly. Diane tried to access Lily's education trust, wanted to liquidate a portion to cover some margin positions she's underwater on. And trust terms are ironclad, restricted solely to Lily's education and medical expenses. I told her attorney that in writing. I almost smiled. Almost. She also asked about you, Walter said quietly. Whether you were okay, whether your leg was healing. I looked out at Highland Park from my porch, the North Shore, the spot where I'd promised Lily we'd go fishing. Tell her I'm going fishing Saturday, I said. Walter was quiet. That's all. Highland Park, North Shore, 10 a.m. If she wants to bring Lily, she knows where to find me. Walter repeated it back carefully the way he always did. I'll pass it along. Thanks, Walter. I set the phone down and looked at the water in the distance. October light turning it copper where the sun touched it dark as old iron everywhere else. Some invitations you send with words. Some you send with a location and a time and let the other person decide what to do with it. I'd done what I could do. The rest was up to her. 2 weeks later, Dorothy Brennan mentioned she'd seen Diane's car parked outside my house on a Tuesday afternoon, idling for 20 minutes, then pulling away without ever opening the door. Dorothy was 72, a widow who'd lived 3 houses down since before Edward was born. She sat on her porch most afternoons with a book she never seemed to finish. watching the neighborhood move around her with the quiet attention of someone who'd seen enough to know when something mattered. "Thought you should know," she said, leaning on her cane at the edge of my driveway. "Wasn't trying to spy, just noticed. Car sat there long enough, I almost went over to see if she needed help. She didn't knock, never got out, just sat there staring at your porch, engine running the whole time. Then she pulled away slow, like maybe she was still deciding." I nodded, not sure what to say, not sure what I felt. "She'll knock when she's ready, Dorothy, or she won't." Dorothy studied me for a moment, the way people do when they're deciding whether to say something or let it go. She chose to let it go. Just patted my arm and walked back to her porch cane, tapping against concrete like a slow metronome, counting something I couldn't name. Diane had driven here, sat outside for 20 minutes, couldn't make herself walk up 6 porch steps. Not ready yet, maybe never ready, but trying. That had to count for something, I just didn't know what. News moved through Pittsburgh the way it always did, slowly, quietly, unshakably. Vincent Holloway's cooperation agreement with the State Real Estate Commission was public record now. The commission had scheduled a formal review hearing for December, a careful examination of 4 decades of protection payments and development deals my father had orchestrated, and I'd spent 6 weeks unraveling. Holloway Development had pulled out of 2 syndications, distancing themselves from the fallout. Diane had taken indefinite leave from her position at the investment firm, citing personal family matters. Her BMW was listed for sale online, the asking price dropping weekly. Small consequences, quiet consequences, the kind that didn't make headlines but changed lives just the same. Walter had called earlier in the week, with the updates, his voice carrying that careful neutrality lawyers cultivate when they're delivering news that cuts both ways. He didn't ask what I thought, didn't ask what I wanted, just gave me the facts and let me sit with them. I sat with them, didn't know what else to do. Saturday morning, I took Lily fishing at the Monongahela River banks, where the water ran slow and dark beneath the iron bridge spans. Edward had called. Wednesday night, asked if I was free, said Lily had been asking about me, asked if I'd meant what I said about every week. I meant it. We sat on the south bank at dawn, my crutch propped against a sycamore behind us, Lily's bobber floating motionless in water that reflected the rusted skeleton of the old steelworks. Closed in 2009, shut down the year Gregory graduated high school, the year everything changed and nothing changed, and all of it kept moving forward anyway. 40 minutes passed. The bobber didn't move. Neither of us minded. "Why do you like fishing so much, Grandpa?" Lily asked, her voice small against the sound of the river. I watched the bobber float steady and patient, rising and falling with the current, like a promise that didn't guarantee anything except that it would keep floating until something real happened beneath. "Because fish don't know a thing about last Tuesday," I said. Lily thought about that for a while, then nodded like it made perfect sense. Maybe at 9 years old it did. The water caught the morning light, turning copper, where the sun touched it dark as old iron everywhere else. I'd given 42 years to the steel mills, back when the furnaces still ran and the Monongahela carried more than memories. I'd learned early, you can't rewrite someone else's shame, can't carry it for them, can only let them carry it themselves and hope they're strong enough not to let it crush them. Lily reeled in her line, checked her bait cast again. Patient, learning, her form getting better each time. Some things you teach, some things you just show up for and let happen. Walter called again early November, his voice carrying more weight this time. Diane's counsel initiated the debt restructuring formally. Settlement negotiations with the card issuers are in progress. She's selling the BMW, moving to something more practical. Good. She's also living separately now. Rented a smaller place in Shadyside. Nothing's been filed yet, no divorce papers, but they're not under the same roof anymore. I didn't say anything, didn't know what to say. Walter went quiet on the line. Not uncomfortable quiet. The kind 2 men who've known each other 30 years can hold without filling. She asked again Raymond if you'd sit down with her, talk. No lawyers, no intermediaries, just the 2 of you. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then went silent. I looked out the kitchen window at those 6 porch steps. Diane had sat in her car, staring at them for 20 minutes. Couldn't make herself climb them. I could unlock the door, swing it open, make it easy. Or I could lock it, make it clear. But neither felt right. Neither felt honest. Tell her I haven't locked the door, I said slowly, working it out as I spoke. But I haven't opened it either. When she's ready, honestly ready, not convenience ready, not obligation ready, She knows where this house sits. Walter was quiet for several beats. Then, that's the message you want me to deliver. That's the message. All right, Raymond, I'll tell her. Walter, I said before he could hang up, thank you for standing in that corner with me, for 30 years of friendship, for being right when I needed someone to be right. We've been friends 30 years, Ray. You were right. I just helped you prove it. Walter sighed softly. I'll deliver the message. I set the phone down and looked out the kitchen window at the 6 porch steps Diane couldn't climb yet. Not locked, not open. The first honest answer I'd given in 38 years since the day Gregory was born, and I'd promised to protect him from everything I couldn't name. Honest felt strange. Honest felt like waiting. Honest felt like the only thing I had left to give. I climbed the senior fund office steps on one crutch in mid-November to ask a question I'd never asked in 8 years. I want to see exactly what my money is doing. The receptionist looked surprised, then smiled. Let me get Margaret for you. Margaret Fletcher was 58, the kind of woman who'd spent 30 years in nonprofit work and wore the exhaustion and purpose of it in equal measure. She managed the Pittsburgh Senior Support Fund from a cramped second-floor office on the north side, coordinating assistance programs for elderly residents who lived alone without family networks. She shook my hand, gestured to a chair in her office. Mr. Kowalski, I've wanted to meet you for years, but you've always kept your distance. Preferred it that way. Most of our major donors do. She pulled a thick binder from her shelf, set it on the desk between us. But I'm glad you're here. You should see what you've built. She walked me through the operational books page by careful page. My monthly contributions steady for 8 years since the year after Gregory died, funded home health aid visits for seniors too frail to manage alone, grocery deliveries for those who couldn't drive anymore, medical transit vans to get people to doctor appointments they'd otherwise miss, hot meal programs for the ones who'd stopped cooking for themselves because eating alone felt pointless. You've been on our ledger as anonymous donor 8 years. Mr. Kowalski, Margaret said quietly, a lot of seniors have hot dinners tonight because of you, even if they don't know your name. I looked at the numbers, the careful accounting of small dignities maintained. Not grand gestures, not status, just the quiet work of making sure people weren't forgotten. On the wall outside her office, framed photographs showed local residents the fund had helped. Faces weathered by age and circumstance, smiling in their own kitchens, their own homes, living with assistance instead of being warehoused in facilities that charged by the month and measured life in billing cycles. I thought about the nursing home brochures Diane had sent me years ago. Sleek facilities with price tags that started at $8,500 monthly. Clean, professional, lonely as a tomb. Thank you for showing me this, I said. Margaret nodded. Thank you for caring. Not everyone does. I left the office thinking about what I'd built without announcing it, without needing credit, without turning generosity into performance. 8 years of quiet giving. 8 years of being exactly the opposite of everything Diane had valued. I would never be a line item on anyone's budget. Not ever again. Late November. 1 week before Thanksgiving, the doorbell rang at 4 in the afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone. Edward was working. Franklin was visiting his daughter in Ohio. Walter only called, never stopped by unannounced. I opened the door. Diane stood on the welcome mat, alone. No Lily, no lawyer, no intermediary. She wore a simple autumn coat, navy blue, the kind you bought for function instead of fashion. Her face was bare of makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail I hadn't seen since she was 35, before Gregory made partner, before the BMW and the investment accounts, and the carefully constructed image of success. Can I come inside? She asked. I stepped back, held the door. We walked to the kitchen without speaking, our footsteps echoing in the small house the way they had decades ago before everything fractured. The same kitchen where Lily had sat eating cookies, spilling the secret that started everything. The same Formica table, the same cracked tile by the sink. Neither of us put the kettle on. Neither of us offered coffee or searched for small talk to fill the space. We just sat down across from each other at that old table. Through the window, November light hit the porch steps at the exact angle it had 38 years ago when we'd first walked through this door together as family when Gregory was 7, and everything still felt possible. I don't even know where to start, Diane said finally. I looked at her, really looked. Saw the lines around her eyes, the gray creeping into her hairline, the exhaustion of someone who'd been running for years, and finally stopped because she'd run out of road. Then don't start, I said, just sit here. So we did. Minute 1. Diane's hands fidgeted with the edge of her coat. Minute 2, she looked around the kitchen like she was cataloging what had changed and what hadn't. Minute 3, I heard the clock ticking on the wall, steady and patient. Minute 4, a car passed outside. Minute 5, the refrigerator hummed to life, then quieted. Minute 6, Diane's breathing slowed, deepened. Minute 7, her hands stopped fidgeting. Minute 8, her shoulders dropped half an inch. Minute 9, she looked up and met my eyes for the first time since she'd sat down. Minute 10, we just sat there, two people who'd spent 38 years filling silence with blame and bitterness, finally learning what it felt like to just be in the same room without needing it to mean more than it meant. No apologies, no forgiveness, no grand gestures or promises neither of us could keep. Just physical presence. Just the smallest, quietest stone something new might eventually be built on if we were patient enough and honest enough to let it happen slowly. Diane looked around the kitchen again. The same Formica table, the same cracked tile, the same humming refrigerator that had been humming since before Gregory was born. This house is smaller than I remembered, she said quietly. I nodded, understood what she was really saying, that the house hadn't changed, that she had, that the life she'd been chasing, bigger, louder, more expensive, had made this small, honest kitchen seem insufficient when it had never been insufficient at all. No, I told her, it's always been this size. She looked at me, held my gaze, and for the first time in 38 years, she understood what I meant. The house hadn't shrunk. Her sense of what mattered had just finally started to grow. Diane knocked on my door 40 minutes before Thanksgiving dinner, not to arrive, to ask if she could help cook. I handed her a paring knife and a bag of potatoes. We stood side by side at the sink, not talking much, just the small exchanges people make when they're focused on the same task. How long for the bird? Whether the oven ran hot, if anyone was bringing rolls. Normal questions, small questions, the kind you ask when you're not trying to fix everything at once, just trying to be useful in the moment you're standing in. The table was set for 8, not 40. Edward and his wife Carol, Dorothy from down the street, Franklin, Lily, Diane, me. That was enough. When Lily burst through the door an hour later, she didn't hesitate. Just ran straight across the kitchen and wrapped her arms around my waist, nearly knocking me off balance. Grandpa. I laughed. First genuine laugh I'd had in months, maybe years. The kind that starts deep and catches you by surprise because you'd forgotten what it felt like. Dinner proceeded without incident. Edward talked about a rewiring project he was finishing up. Carol, 32, with a quiet warmth that asked nothing of anyone, set down a perfect sweet potato pie she'd made from scratch. Dorothy shared a story about her late husband that made Franklin smile. Diane sat beside Lily and quietly cut her turkey into smaller pieces without being asked. Not perfect reconciliation, not forgiveness exactly, just 8 people choosing the same table, fully aware of everything that had passed between them, choosing presents anyway. That was enough, more than enough. December 1st, 30 days before the new year, I sat in my usual kitchen chair where I used to unwind after graveyard shifts 20 years ago. The laptop Edward had bought me last Christmas sat open on the table screen, glowing in the evening dark. I logged into the pension portal, verified the balance, checked the digitized trust agreement Walter had emailed, confirmed the transfer had cleared. Everything accounted for, everything balanced. The pension covered utilities and groceries. The roof was bought and paid for. My leg had healed enough to walk without the second crutch. Lily's education was secured regardless of what happened with her parents' finances. The senior fund would keep running, keep helping, keep making sure people weren't forgotten. That was plenty. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. First snow of the season was drifting over homestead roofs, silent and steady, accumulating one flake at a time, the way I'd covered my own debts. Patient, inevitable, quiet. Everything balanced. Not spectacular, not remarkable, just balanced. And that felt like the only victory that mattered. Christmas morning, 6 days before the new year, Lily arrived at dawn with Edward. She was carrying something wrapped in newspaper, grinning like she had a secret. I got you a present, Grandpa. She unwrapped it carefully. A thrift store Polaroid camera, the old kind that spits out square film that develops right in front of you. Edward must have helped her find it, must have remembered something I'd said once about the cameras we used to use before everything went digital. I want to take your picture, Lily said. I sat there with my coffee still in my worn flannel, not dressed for photographs or performance, just sitting in my kitchen on Christmas morning. Smile, Grandpa. The flash popped. The camera whirred. A square of white film slid out, and Lily grabbed it, shaking it gently, the way kids do, even though it doesn't actually help. We watched together as the image emerged slowly from the white. A 65-year-old man in worn flannel, holding a ceramic mug, faint smile on his face. Nothing grand, nothing staged, just true. Lily found a black marker on the counter and wrote across the white border in her careful 9-year-old handwriting, Christmas 2023, my favorite person. The photograph developed slowly in her small hands, the image emerging from white, like truth emerging from time. No rush, no projector, just chemistry and patience. Diane arrived an hour later. She stopped at the kitchen doorway, watching Lily hop around near the small tree Edward had helped me put up, watching the way the morning light caught the snow outside. She saw the fresh Polaroid on the counter, picked it up, read Lily's handwriting. She set it down carefully like it might break. I'm sorry, she whispered. I looked at her, held her gaze. You know, sorry doesn't fix the ledger, Diane. I know, but it's a place to start. She nodded, didn't look away, didn't offer excuses or explanations. Just stood there in my small kitchen, accepting what couldn't be fixed and acknowledging what might eventually be built. I took the Polaroid from the counter and walked to the refrigerator, pressed it against the door beside the rusted Steelers magnet that had been stuck there for 20 years. Lily's handwriting clear and certain, my favorite person. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, Lily laughed at something Edward said. Diane poured herself coffee without asking, just knowing where the mugs were kept, because she'd known this kitchen once, a lifetime ago, before everything broke. I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator, square and small and true. For 38 years, Diane had treated me like a burden, a bill to be managed, a problem to be solved with distance and silence. She'd made me small in her estimation, reduced me to a line item she didn't want to pay. I'd answered with 40 years of receipts, with showing up, with fishing trips and anonymous donations and saying no to nursing homes and yes to Lily's trust fund, with being exactly who I was in this small, honest kitchen, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. And in the end, I'd answered with this square film from a 9-year-old child who saw clearly what her mother had spent decades refusing to see. Truth doesn't need a projector, doesn't need a grand stage or a loud voice or perfect timing. It just needs enough time. And to you listening to my story, remember this. The truth doesn't need a projector or a stage. It just needs time and the courage to face it honestly. I spent too many years avoiding hard conversations, letting silence build walls between me and the people I loved. When that invoice appeared at my father's funeral, I had a choice: bury the truth like he did, or dig until I found it. Don't make my mistake of waiting for a crisis to start asking questions. Ask them now, while there's still time. Here's what I learned. Father's revenge isn't about destroying the people who wronged you. Real father's revenge is protecting what matters while refusing to become what hurt you. It's setting boundaries without burning bridges. It's choosing truth over comfort, even when truth costs you everything. I believe God put me through this journey so I could understand that legacy isn't measured in dollar amounts or grand gestures. It's measured in small moments. A 9-year-old's handwriting on a Polaroid, 10 minutes of honest silence, 6 porch steps that someone finally finds the courage to climb. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my position? When it comes to father's revenge, would you have paid that invoice or asked questions? If you know someone who needs to hear this, please share it. And subscribe to Father's Vengeance for more stories like this. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more than you know. One final note: while this story contains fictionalized elements for depth and reflection, the core message remains true. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living honestly and protecting what matters most.